one ship, one anomaly beyond time. When Captain Alan Hart answers a call from something that shouldn't exist, she steps into a living archive of extinct civilizations and is asked the ultimate question. Will you carry the memory of all who came before? Some returned. She didn't, because someone must remember what the universe tried to forget. Let us know in the comments where you're watching from, and don't forget to subscribe. No one was ever meant to find a beacon. It wasn't built for rescue, not even as a warning. It was a voice, lost between folds of reality, a scream meant to die, to scatter like dust in vacuum, and disappear the way forgotten civilizations vanish. But one day it spoke. When Patrol Station Helios 3 picked up the signal fragment, a frequency not listed in any known database, the on-duty officer shrugged. A glitch, probably. Refraction, background chatter. 100 reasons, all of them wrong. 3 days later, the beacon said its first word. Why? Part 1. Stars don't shine. It's you burning when you look at them. Notes recovered from Station Irida. Captain Alan Hart woke to the distinct feeling that something had already gone wrong. Aboard the long-range science vessel Leviathan, deep in the outer arm of the galaxy, there was no reason for her to wake up. Not during a stable warp drift. No alerts. No system warnings. The crew was still asleep. But her body wouldn't stay still. Something inside her pulsed. Not fear, not instinct, something deeper. Like the echo of a heartbeat that wasn't hers. She pulled on a thermal jacket and stepped into the corridor. The engine hum was familiar, almost soothing. Lighting, stable. Environmental control, optimal. Everything normal, until she passed one of the Starfield viewing bays. There, the image flickered. Slight, barely noticeable, but wrong. She halted. Board AI, diagnostics for display 4B. The voice responded, calm and sterile. All systems nominal. No anomalies detected. But the flicker grew stronger. Then she saw it. A point of light in the center of the starscape, blinking softly. Not a ship. Not a celestial body. Static. And glowing. Magnify. Lock focus. The display zoomed in. The point remained a point, but space around it behaved differently. Not bent, not warped. Twisted. As if something had tied a knot in the fabric of reality itself. She had no name for it. But she knew one thing. Places like that are not where you go. Unless you're someone like her. And people like her don't look away. The bridge was quiet when Captain Hart entered. Lieutenant Soma, her second, stirred from the tactical seat with a half yawn, rubbing sleep from his eyes. Did I miss an alert? No alert, Hart replied, eyes fixed on the primary interface. We have something. She tapped the projection panel, calling up the sector scan. There it was, Sector J, 7912, deep in the far beyond. No colonies. No mapped gravitational anomalies. And yet, a pulse. One frequency. Repeating. Like a forgotten heartbeat. Soma frowned. You think it's a distress signal? Hart didn't answer immediately. Her fingers hovered over the scan feed, replaying the pulse. Not Morse. Not binary. Not code. Not language. It was more like intent. She enlarged the waveform. It wasn't structured as a message, and yet it felt like one. Something was being asked, over and over, by something not expecting a reply. Soma was already syncing the nav charts. No gravitational wells nearby. That object isn't even in motion. It doesn't have to be moving to be dangerous. Still, her curiosity gnawed louder than caution. She initiated a scan on their probe array. The Leviathan was equipped for long-range deployment. Fully automated drones capable of analysis, telemetry, even soft landing. Launch drone Beta 9. Trajectory, direct vector to the anomaly. Soma hesitated. You want to get that close? Hart didn't blink. I want to see what's whispering through the dark. For hours later, the drone arrived. They watched the feed in silence. Nothing. Just a pale shimmer in space, like a curtain of glass hanging in void. No radiation spikes. No magnetic anomalies. No mass signature. The drone's onboard AI flagged one thing. A spatial temperature drop. Sudden. Absolute. That's not possible, Soma muttered. Space doesn't have temperature. Not like that. And yet it's dropping, Hart said. Something is drawing energy. A lot of it. The shimmer began to react. It didn't move, not in any traditional sense. It opened. Not a door. Not a portal. It was more like a peeling of layers, a membrane folding itself inside out, revealing nothing. Not blackness. Not emptiness. Something between. The drone froze. Then the feed died. Soma cursed under his breath. EMP? No spike. It didn't get shut down. Hart's voice was quiet now. It stopped transmitting because it didn't exist anymore. She stood there, staring at the empty feed. And then the console lit up again. Incoming transmission. Source, unknown. Language, none. Content, one word. It appeared on the screen in raw energy pattern. Stay. The word pulsed on the screen for 13 seconds. Then it faded, not like a transmission ending, but like breath on a mirror evaporating in silence. Stay. Soma leaned forward, frowning hard. What the hell does that mean? It means we're not alone, Hart answered softly. And whatever it thinks it has a say. She stepped back from the display. Her hands were steady. Her mind wasn't. She'd seen anomalies. She'd charted ghost signals on the far side of collapsed wormholes, listened to dead stars whispering radiation lullabies across millions of light years. But this felt different. Not dangerous. Not inviting. It felt personal. This isn't protocol, Soma said. No, she replied. It's older than protocol. She called a full crew briefing. 12 scientists. 5 engineers. 3 navigators. 1 captain. They gathered in the central core, where the gravity was truest and the light never flickered. Hart stood before the star map, showing them the dead zone, the static, the transmission, the silence. We're standing at the edge of something, she said. And it's looking back. Someone asked if it was alien. Someone else asked if it was alive. A technician asked if they were going to leave. Hart shook her head. We came to observe. So we will. But nobody goes in until we understand what in means. That night, she didn't sleep. Instead, she sat alone in the observation deck, watching that impossible point through the viewing panel. The shimmer no longer flickered. It pulsed now, not light, not sound, but like a breath. And for a moment, one short, aching moment, she felt like it was watching her too. Not with malice, not with intent, but recognition. Then the voice came again. Not through the speakers, not in her ears. Inside, not a word, not even a thought. An emotion planted like a seed. You remember. She gasped and staggered back. The panel blinked. No alarms. No motion. But in the far glass of the viewport, for just a second, she saw herself standing outside the ship. Watching. Smiling. By morning, 2 more drones had been sent. Both disappeared. No signals. No wreckage. Nothing. The shimmer didn't react again. It simply waited. The crew grew restless. Some demanded they leave. Others couldn't look away. Soma confronted her in private. Captain, we're not a search and rescue vessel. This is beginning to look like a trap. Then why bait it with nothing but silence? He didn't have an answer. Hart walked the corridors for hours after. Every step felt heavier. Not from fatigue, but from distance. It was as if the ship itself was slowing, pulled by something not physical. By the time she returned to her cabin, a new message had arrived on her private console. No origin. No timestamp. Just one line, blinking. We are what you forgot. The phrase haunted her all day. We are what you forgot. Hart reviewed the logs again. The message hadn't traveled through any normal channel. It hadn't passed through comms, encryption layers, or even electromagnetic receivers. It was simply there, as if it had always existed in the buffer, just waiting to be read. Soma increased the ship's scan radius. He widened the sensor net until the processors strained under the data load. The anomaly remained unquantifiable. No heat, no gravitational pull, no evidence it had mass at all. And yet, the ship kept drifting, barely measurable, less than a millimeter per minute, but toward the shimmer, always toward it. They tried manual corrections, course stabilization, thruster pulses. Nothing held. Nothing changed. Like swimming upstream against a tide they couldn't see. A day later, Engineer Volok collapsed in the engine bay. They carried him to medbay, where he woke screaming, eyes unfocused, skin covered in a sheen of cold sweat. They're not speaking, he gasped. They're showing. I saw. But he couldn't describe it. Every time he tried, he shook uncontrollably, as if the words recoiled inside him before reaching his mouth. Hart ordered him sedated. Later, she reviewed security footage from the engine corridor. Volok had been alone. No malfunctions. But 37 seconds before his collapse, the lights dimmed. Every sensor in the hallway glitched at once, as if reality itself had flickered. She isolated the frame. One moment. One frame. There, just behind him, blurred, impossible to focus, was the outline of a figure. No facial features. No suit. No mass. Only the idea of a presence, half-formed, reaching. Then the lights returned. And it was gone. She met with the crew. Tensions were rising now. Containment was no longer an option. We don't know what this is, the astrobiologist said. And that means we should leave before it decides to learn about us. Others nodded. A few didn't. Dr. Lauren, the linguist, sat at the edge of the room, watching Hart with glassy eyes. When everyone had spoken, he finally said, "It's not trying to harm us. It's asking for something." "What?" He hesitated. "A witness." Silence fell like ice on the room. That night, Hart dreamed. Except it wasn't a dream. She stood on a shoreline of black glass. Above her, a sky split into fragments, stars reflected as if from the bottom of a well. In front of her stood herself, or what once had been her, but older, not in age and memory. This version of herself wore a uniform she had never seen, eyes full of loss she had never lived. And behind her, the sea boiled with light. Countless hands, not human, reaching skyward like they were trying to remember how. Her reflection self spoke only one sentence. "If you don't enter, there will be no one left to tell them they mattered." She awoke with tears in her eyes. And the ship was now only 3,000 kilometers from the shimmer. The engines were still on, but they weren't moving anymore. The Leviathan had stopped obeying. And outside, the shimmer began to change. Not pulsing, not flickering, breathing. No protocol prepared them for what the shimmer became. It no longer hovered like a point of light. It grew, expanding outward, not in space, but in presence. Soma tried to shut down propulsion, reboot guidance, even override the AI. Nothing responded. Even the ship's synthetic voice had fallen silent, not broken, not deactivated, just absent, like it had gone somewhere else to listen. Hart stood on the bridge, watching the impossible unfold on the main viewport. A slow spiral of structures now turned inside the shimmer. Not ships, not architecture. Something between nerves and orbitals, like the fossilized thoughts of a species that never learned to forget. "It's constructing," whispered Lauren behind her. "No," she said. "It's remembering." Valak, now conscious, sat upright in the mebe, eyes fixated on something no one else could see. "They weren't trying to communicate," he murmured. "They were leaking." "What?" "Their memory. It's spilling out. Everything they were." All at once, Dr. Elia, the psychologist, observed him closely. "Valak, who are they?" He smiled with something like sadness. "Not a who, a when." And then he began to speak in a language none of them recognized, a low, rhythmic tone, patterned like breath. Not a voice, but a pulse through his throat, a pattern that felt like it was drilling into their bones. By the 6th hour, the shimmer had enveloped the ship. There was no jolt, no alert, no flashing lights. Just a gentle quiet, like the moment before snowfall. The stars outside twisted into rivers of color, as though smeared across glass. They were inside. The anomaly had accepted them. Or maybe it never needed to. Then the gravity shifted. Only slightly, a tingling under their skin, a weightlessness in the bones. And the walls of the Leviathan began to change. First, the screens, no longer showing internal ship data, but vast halls filled with empty silhouettes. Then, the floor flickering, becoming transparent, revealing not machinery but stone, worn smooth by time and memory. It was as if the ship had been reskinned by a dream. "We're still here," Soma said. "The instruments say we haven't moved." "Then maybe space did," Hart replied. That's when the voices began. Not through ears. Not in language. They heard them in themselves. Each crew member heard something different. Soma saw his father, dead 40 years, speaking a phrase he never got to say. Elia felt the moment she let go of her daughter's hand at the train station. Lauren walked through a corridor lined with the bones of extinct languages, whispering questions no alphabet could capture. And Hart stood again on the black glass shoreline. But now, there were others. Not versions of herself, others. Alien. Human. Neither. All witnesses. They didn't speak. They only watched her. And the sky split again. A voice deeper than thought rose through her. "We made the memory of stars so that we would not end. But now there is no one left to carry them. Will you remember what we were, even if it makes you something else?" She didn't answer. She couldn't. Because she was beginning to remember. Not as herself, but as something that once watched time bleed from a dying world. The Leviathan no longer obeyed physical laws. It floated through the shimmer like a thought through a dream, directionless, timeless, and yet deeply watched. No systems responded. No engines fired. The ship was intact, but the rules were not. The crew began to change. Not visibly. Not at first. But their memories twisted. Conversations happened out of sequence. Someone would say something, and someone else would reply to it before it had even been spoken. Hart found herself standing in rooms she hadn't entered. She touched a panel once and saw her childhood bedroom instead of controls. She blinked, and it was gone, replaced by ship steel and sterile lighting. But the worst part was that it didn't feel wrong. It felt true. Like the universe was correcting itself around something that had never been real. In the observation chamber, Lauren sat alone. The linguist was speaking aloud, softly, rhythmically, as if rehearsing an ancient prayer. Hart approached. "What are you saying?" He didn't look at her. "I don't know. But it's what the walls want to hear." "The walls?" He finally turned. There were tears in his eyes, but not from fear. "This place isn't a prison. It's a cathedral of extinction. Every structure, every shimmer, it's part of the story they couldn't bear to lose." He tapped his chest. "And they're writing it into us. Word by word." Hart didn't reply. She couldn't. Because deep inside her, under the memories, under the thoughts, something had begun to stir. Not a voice. A feeling. Like a name she used to have, but in a language older than the sun. Soma tried to override the ship again. This time, the panel responded. But it didn't show schematics. It showed a map. Not a star map. Not coordinates. A map of moments. He touched a glowing point, and was instantly thrust into vision. He stood on a scorched world, surrounded by a race he'd never seen, tall, luminous, flickering like candlelight. They were dying. Not of war. Not of sickness. Of forgetting. They surrounded a monolith made of mirrored bone, whispering into it their final truths. And one of them turned and looked at him, through him, and said in a language made of light, "You were late. But still, you came." In the med bay, Valak began speaking in two voices at once. One his, one not. "We are not what we were. But we remember. We remember the fire that cracked time. We remember the silence after names. And now, you must decide what stays." The crew gathered in the central chamber. No one spoke. They all felt the question now. The shimmer, the anomaly, it wasn't a place. It was a mnemonic engine. A living vault of civilizations that had passed beyond entropy, species, dreams, languages, souls, saved not in stone or code, but in experience. And it had been alone for far too long. Now it had found new carriers. Hart returned to the viewport. Outside, reality flowed like ink. Stars moved like memory, constellations blooming into cities that never were. She heard the question again, not from the shimmer, from within herself. If we give you all that we are, will you carry it? Will you become the story? Even if it costs you your own. She pressed her hand to the glass and whispered, yes. She said yes, and the ship answered, not in lights, not in alarms, but in silence, vast and weightless, the kind of silence that only comes before birth. The shimmer pulsed one final time. Then it folded inward, collapsing like a flower into itself, not disappearing, but entering them. The Leviathan was no longer moving, because there was no more distance left. They were within the archive now. Or rather, the archive was within them. Each crew member began to change, slowly, subtly, undeniably. Their skin retained memory. Their eyes began to see beyond spectrum. They spoke to one another without words, and shared dreams that were not theirs. Valak saw a forest that never grew on Earth. Its leaves sang and bled light when touched. Elia held a child's hand beneath a violet sun and knew she had never given birth in her life. Soma walked across a frozen sea made of glass, each step echoing the names of species extinct before the Milky Way had cooled. And Hart stood at the center of it all. Not alone. Not anymore. She felt every voice. Not heard. Felt. 12 billion minds. Burned. Lost. Preserved. Some joyful. Some broken. Some still screaming. All of them asking, now that we are in you, will you live for us? The Leviathan's walls turned translucent. Not fading, opening. Like the ship itself was peeling away from its identity, releasing its frame, becoming something else. The bridge dissolved into a cathedral of memory, curved spires made of thought, glowing tapestries woven from synaptic echoes. And the crew stood at the altar. Hart raised her hand. Her skin shimmered faintly, like static in a dream. She opened her mouth not to speak, but to give. And from her chest rose a fragment of her oldest memory. A night beneath an earth sky. The stars still cold. The future still uncertain. She let it go. It became a part of the archive. A whisper in the infinite. Then came the choice. Not forced. Not requested. Offered. The shimmer coalesced into a final form. A gate. Not spatial. Not temporal. But existential. One path. Return. To who they were. To the lives they had before. To forgetting. The other. Remain. To carry the memory. To become more. Not gods. Not aliens. Just witnesses. Keepers of the stories no one else would ever tell. The crew stood in silence. Some stepped back. Elia chose Earth. Soma too. Lauren stayed. So did Valak. And Hart? She watched the gate flicker. She saw the future she could reclaim, her command, her body, her name. And then she saw the faces of all the extinct. Watching her. Waiting. She took one step forward. Then another. The shimmer embraced her like an answer. And then she was gone. There was no explosion. No final image of light. Captain Alan Hart simply stepped beyond what could be seen and became what could only be remembered. The Leviathan remained adrift. Outside, nothing had changed. The stars still burned. The shimmer had vanished, folded back into whatever fold of space birthed it. The ship was found 21 standard days later, picked up by a long-range probe from the Vega relay. It was intact. Systems restored. Life support running. But half the crew was gone. No signs of struggle. No bodies. Just missing, like they'd walked into a room that wasn't there anymore. Those who returned couldn't explain it. Soma left the service 3 months later. Elia spoke at the inquiry, but never once used the word anomaly. They called it a system fault. Deep space stress. Hallucination. They were lying. But not to others, to themselves. Because none of them could forget what they'd seen. And sometimes, just before sleep, they would feel it again, that breath on the back of the soul, whispering a single truth. You are not alone. You are not the first. But now, you're the keeper. Years passed. In the outer spiral, among dead systems and quiet stars, signals began to pulse. Not distress calls. Not invitations. Just echoes. Messages with no language. Coordinates with no mass. But anyone who followed them, anyone who dared drift close, felt it. Not danger. Remembrance. The shimmer returned. Not in one place. Not in one time. It became many. A constellation of memory. And inside each, someone like Hart stood, waiting. Watching. Not human anymore. Not alien. Something between. Something willing to carry what the universe refused to bury. A voice. A vault. A final answer to entropy. Nothing truly dies. If someone chooses to remember,